This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
We want families to come here and gain insightful strategies that empower them to successfully teach diverse learners at home.
Hosted by founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, Peggy Ployer.
Our goal is that these powerful weekly conversations will boost your confidence to cultivate the best at-home learning environment for your student.
For more homeschool resources, go to spedhomeschool.com. You're listening to Empowering Homeschool Conversations with Peggy Ployer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about how to create harmonious spiritual and homeschool rhythms with special guest Katie Westenberg. Katie is a follower of Christ, a wife, and a mom. Growing faithfully alongside her 4 homeschooled children, she believes boldly in the transformation power of faith in Jesus Christ. As an author and a speaker, she teaches women how to grow a robust theology of who God is, become students of Scripture, and learn to live that truth with courage. She serves a thriving community of women at katiewestenberg.com and makes her home in the lovely Pacific Northwest. Welcome, Katie. I am so happy to have you on the show and for you to share with us today.
Thank you for having me, Peggy. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, harmonious spiritual and homeschool rhythms. That just sounds wonderful. I think it almost seems like a pipe dream for many, especially in our community. They're like, I live in so much chaos that this is just not a possibility. But I want you to hang on if that's where you're at right now, because this is a message that you really just need to hear. We don't realize we are a product so much of things around us and things we don't even know about. And Katie has some insight and some wisdom to share with you today on that. So stay tuned. If you are watching live, we would love for you to be part of our conversation, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Just put your comments, your questions in the feed, and we will see those on our side, and we would love to include them as part of our conversation. So getting started, Katie, I always ask my guests, the first question is, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and especially since you are a homeschooler, a little bit about your homeschooling journey.
Yeah. So I've been married for 22 years to my high school sweetheart. And so I had big plans after high school to leave. We live over here in South Central Washington, and I thought I would leave for another coastline. But I ended up leaving for college and coming right back and staying here. So God obviously had different plans. But and we've had 4 children, and I didn't really intend to homeschool. I went to public or private school. And so I wasn't, that wasn't really anything I had known or experienced. But as we started to have children, we had seen some families do it really well. And that's what caught our attention, is just seeing how they had done it and how their kids turned out. And we thought, is this possible for us? So I really only committed to 1 kid at a time, or 1 year at a time, I didn't even have all my children. Just like, well, we could do this for 1 year. How much can I mess up? Right. And by the grace of God, my oldest just graduated in June. So he's 18, awesome. And then I have daughters that are 15 and 13, and then my last is a boy who's 11. So we're still going, and now I just wouldn't trade it for anything. Being on this other side of it now and seeing it through to completions, and God's just grace through all of that, is faithfulness, and my strengths and apparent weaknesses as well. But he grows the fruit. So it's been a sweet time for my family.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, is God grows the fruit. We often think that we're the ones growing the fruit. And it adds a lot of stress to our lives when we think that that's our job. But that's awesome. And yes, when you graduate the first, it's like you go, oh, this is possible. And it kind of, you kind of let down, that tension a little bit. I've graduated 3 now. That was all my kids, so I'm done. But it seems like this insurmountable hill. And once you've made it over the one with the first one, you're like, oh man, why did I make such a deal about this?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I was kind of surprised by the amount of shock I had. Like, it happened. It worked. Like, I believe God was faithful. But like, well, I don't know why I'm surprised right now, but I'm a little bit surprised. Like, it all worked. And that's how you become a different parent to those younger kids, because you just learn as you go, and you learn to trust God more as you go too.
Absolutely. Yes. And you apologize a lot and ask forgiveness from your oldest.
Yeah.
Thankfully, God makes them very resilient.
That's right.
And mine is very strong-willed too, so that helps as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Hey, it's
But
better to start that way, right? They
oh
sharpen
yeah,
you.
right, exactly. That's so true. So when did you realize that you needed to homeschool and live from a new framework? Because I'm going to let our audience know that Katie wrote a book. I've got a
Mhm.
copy right here. It's
Mhm.
called "But Then She Remembered," and in here you talk. I guess the most pertinent chapter that I found was God's view of our time is of time.
Mhm.
It's not ours.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
when did you realize that that was kind of out of sync in your life? And just kind of share a story with other homeschool moms because I think they're going to really relate to where
Mhm.
you're coming from on this.
Yeah, it might have been day one homeschooling that I realized it's out of sync when you have all these ideals, I'd read great
Right.
books and knew what this looked like in my mind. It's like parenting
Yeah.
before you have children, right? Oh, you're just
Yeah.
so idealistic and you can't do it any other way. So there's nothing wrong with having these goals and ambitions of this is what it's going to look
It's
like. And
true.
we're going to
Yeah.
sit in cute clothes and listen to classical music and do
Right.
art. And it's just, and then day one, when my entire kitchen table is just destroyed and it's a mess and I still have to make dinner, like, wait a minute, this is not like, or week one,
Right.
this is not what I thought it was going to look like. And, or you're
Hmm.
frustrated or tired and yeah, we got to do this again tomorrow. And that's maybe
Yeah.
why we committed to 1 year at a time early on. I thought 18 years, it feels like a sentence. Like, I don't know how I could
Yeah.
possibly do that. So there's some of that just realizing it right away. But I think really what brought that all to fruition is just the daily faithfulness of,
Mm.
okay, so now I have to teach this kid and then another kid comes along and they're finally learning too. And
Right.
it just seems like there's not enough time. There's not enough of you. All of those
Absolutely.
lies come in our head. There's not enough time, like just in my day, but there's not also enough time in 18 years for me to teach these kids everything they need to know to thrive. It's just, it
Absolutely.
all feels like lack, right? And so that's
Hmm.
the lie we begin to believe when I think, wait a minute, if I believe God created me to do this, if I believe He empowers me to do this, then the enough isn't me, the enough isn't the time, the enough is God. So it's
Yeah.
changing my view and how I look at the time I do have. Am I going to do everything? Am I going to teach everything? No, but I probably didn't learn everything in those 18 years either. There's good growth, thank God, that happens after those 18 years. But the time I do
Absolutely.
have, as limited as it is, the capacity I do have, as limited as that is, I want that to glorify God. So it kind of changes how we look at that.
Right. Yeah. So in general, I mean, how do you see that most parents come into that and kind of react to that struggle, I guess,
Hmm.
because I guess our first inclination as our human nature is not to say, oh, yeah, I just need to lean on God. It's what we
Mhm,
should do,
mhm,
but it's not what
mhm,
we do.
mhm,
So, how can our viewers recognize maybe I'm in this place and I'm maybe not handling it the right way?
mhm. Yeah, and our first reflex is shame, right? I'm not enough for the
Absolutely.
God should have picked a different girl. If they only had that mom, when we're seeing from the outside, if they had that mom who did all those creative projects and she's so patient and all those other
Right.
things, we just look elsewhere. But
Hmm.
but getting away from it for a moment and thinking, what would God have me do? Like, what is my ultimate goal here with these kids?
Right.
Is it this many math lessons by this date, or is it to take a heart that is like, flailing as theirs is,
Uh-huh.
as mine often is as well, and to bow before my creator and surrender it to him. Like, so if a good day to
Yeah.
day is half a math lesson and we glorified God in it, then is that going to be
Right.
good enough? Would that be good enough if I had to stand before the Lord and say, this is what we did, but we did it
Right.
faithfully? And I don't know if it matched up with anyone's standards or scope and sequence today, but you
Right.
know what? We did the best we could with what we had, right? That's like
Yeah.
the talents that we spend before him. And I don't want to
Hmm.
do that something ugly, like I'm trying to chase this, but we have to get here. Do we? Do we really have to get here? And some days are
Right.
great. Some seasons are easier where we're super productive. And I don't
Hmm.
think we stay there long enough because we get super prideful if we did, right? Like then all of a
Oh,
sudden,
so true. Yes,
yeah. So
absolutely.
then someone gets sick or family comes and visits or someone's not doing well or with some of your students are going to go through struggles that we're in a
Right.
season right now where we're just not productive by the world standards. But if
Mhm.
productivity is loving them well through this and
Yes.
glorifying God and keeping a happy heart, no matter my circumstances, that's really what we want to teach our kids because they're as adults, they're going to go through the same thing, these ups
Oh,
and downs of
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
not only learning from us in that season, but they're watching how we deal with the struggle.
Yeah, yeah, and those lessons stay much more ingrained in them than the math lesson that only got half finished or
That's
the
right.
absolutely, because
Mhm.
without even thinking about it, they're putting that mode of operation into
Mhm.
their own life. It just
That's right.
happens, and we don't even know,
Mhm.
that it happens. They,
Mhm.
so much research says that, if you had a parent who is depressed, you're going to grow up with depressive attitude because of the
Mhm.
copying you do of
Mhm.
that parent's just what they do. Not that
Mhm.
you were an environment that, was high into, which would lead to depression. It was just the
Mhm.
response that you were taught without words,
Mhm.
that nonverbal
Mhm.
response. So yeah,
That's
it's
right.
it's just
That's right.
insane that yeah, we can get so off without even knowing about it. And yet we live in a world that is I think puts us even more so out of sync. And can you talk about that and just
Mhm.
the general move to being much more distracted and how
Mhm.
that leads us even more out of sync from being able to pull back and focus on what's most important.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Your words remind me of a specific conversation my husband and I had. And it was just after those like one long days where just everything blends together and you're not on all those highs and peaks. And this kid isn't excelling at all these things and they all have their issues and I'm feeling the weight of all of them. And I the question we asked that night, I remember, was, is it possible to succeed at all of the things that don't matter and fail at the ones that do, right? Like, could I focus so much on all these
Yes.
areas where the kids aren't adding up, but do we
Hmm.
have their hearts? So it's just
Right.
that stepping back and remembering, what is my ultimate goal with these kids? What's my ultimate goal?
Hmm.
Is it, so I can show someone on their paper that their GPA was wonderful? Is it that I can, brag about that to other parents or their grandparents or whatever so I can feel good about what I'm doing here? Or
Right.
is it
Yeah.
like I really want to bring them up in the fear and the admonition of the Lord? So what would
Hmm.
that look like on a given day? So asking
Yeah.
those greater questions. So it's not taking on the shame and drowning with them, but like, okay, how can I step back and reorient what we're doing here?
Absolutely. Yes, and that seems like such a hard thing to do. Do you have any suggestions on how do we get ourselves out of that mindset and
Hmm.
say, I'm on the wrong path right now,
Hmm.
or even
Hmm.
to notice
Yeah.
I'm on the wrong path
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah. I would just keep the question in front of me because we can get better at asking those questions. I remember,
Yeah.
like, I've done this in so many different ways in my life. I feel like when we get in a new area, we can be really good at it in one area of our life,
Mm.
like in our
Yeah.
marriage or whatever. But then we turn to another area and we just forget all of our tools, right? So
Yeah.
for me, that looked like with my very first book that came out. So the majority of my time is spent as a homeschooling mom. That's what I do. And God has carved out some capacity to do this writing and speaking thing. So the first book comes along. And just before it was about to come out, about 6 weeks before, your publicist starts lining up all these interviews and things that you need to be doing. And I'd never done any of that before. My job is
Right.
at home with my kids.
Yeah.
And so all of these things were put on my calendar and it started to make me really anxious, really nervous because there's all this stuff out there that I can't address now and I'm not used to having it on my schedule and I'm thinking, is it too much? Is
Right.
it, am I still going to be able to have dinner on the table? Is this a bad decision? Am I going to ruin my kids? The question we all ask ourselves from time to time. And I remember calling one of my friends and asking her, is this just what it's going to be like for the next 6 weeks? I'm going to have this like ball of nerves in my stomach all the time. I don't like
Mm.
feeling this way. And she said, I want to ask you one thing right now, Katie. What are you believing to be true about God right now? So
Hmm.
what she just did is took me from like that zero in, focusing on all the lack, right? Same thing as a
Right.
homeschooling mom drowning and not being enough, and saying like, pull
Hmm.
back and remember who he is here. Cause I write about these things. I believe these things. But in that moment, I
Exactly.
got my eye off the ball, right? And
Yeah.
I wept because I was just like, I'm believing that he's not big enough. I'm believing that my
Yeah.
practical theology, what I'm living right now, is an absolute lie. And so quickly
Yeah.
I changed my heart to believing that. So quick to have a friend that can help you to be the friend,
Absolutely.
to say,
Hmm.
bring your eyes back here. Remember, math doesn't matter that much, not that much. It's not worth losing relationship over. So
Right.
just having a friend to do that, but also being that friend. And I
Yeah.
think because
Uh-huh.
I have friends that done that, I become better at asking myself the question. So if you need to put it on your
Yes.
refrigerator, what's my ultimate purpose today? What's my ultimate goal when we do math? Get it in front of you enough to train your reflexes to think about that.
Mhm. Yeah. I think we've so separated from community too. and that
Mhm.
we often don't have those voices of truth coming into our lives. And so
Mhm.
we just dig our hole deeper and deeper and push the
That's
world
right.
out more and more. And
Mhm.
the burden becomes greater because we are not looking
Mm.
where we need to be looking, and there's nobody
That's right.
telling us that we're looking in the wrong place.
That's right. That's
And
exactly right.
and you have to really work. And I realize that parents in our community, like when my son was kicked out of every homeschool co-op and everything, it it was work to try to find community, but it was work that was well worth it.
That's
And,
right. Yes.
because like Katie was talking about, you can't from a sometimes even a perspective that wants to pursue God, pursue
Mhm.
God because
Mhm.
you're thinking everything is just so muddled, especially
Mhm.
when you feel that pressure. I think that, like you were saying, that the pressure kind of pressed you, of all
Mhm.
these things that were coming into your life. And we tend to just, go to these routes or places where it's like I'm putting on this protective mechanism to like almost shut
Mhm.
down in this place.
Mhm.
But I love what you said, God is bigger than all of that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if he puts you in it, he's going to bring you through it. And yeah, that's something we often
Mhm.
forget. Um, so as far as I've talked to one parent and I wanted to bring this question up. They said, what, I want to rest. I want to have this peaceful time. I want to sit down. I want to read my Bible. But when I do, I can't. I sit there and like my mind is running. I can't even
Mhm.
rest. Um,
Mhm.
what kind of advice do you have for that mom?
Yeah. Yeah. My first is that you're normal, right? Because
Yeah,
I
exactly.
experienced this. I experienced the same thing. It is so tempting. And I feel like distractions aren't necessarily new, but they really are closer than ever before. We have our
Yeah,
phones, they're usually just an arm's length away. And if it's not our phone, it's on our wrist through our watch. That's just closer than
right.
ever before, right? So the
Mhm.
temptation is
Absolutely.
greater. Um, so there's a couple things. First of all, I love when I read through scripture and I was thinking through these things, I love the idea that God knows our frame, that he
Mm,
knows we are made from dust. He knows how these minds work, right?
right.
When we talk about remembering in the book, the whole thing is that God has placed that all throughout scripture to
Absolutely.
remember who he is. And he knows our weak minds. So he set up standards for remembrance. He set up the plan for
Yeah.
Joshua to set up rocks. He's saying, set these things
Mhm.
up so you can remember and you can tell these things to your children and to your grandchildren. And we see those miracles. We
Absolutely.
see like the Red Sea parting mentioned through scripture again and
Mhm.
again and again. And we see even like Paul's conversion told 3 times throughout Acts. Just the repetitive nature of the Bible reminds me that he knew that we were going to forget these things easily. And so he
Yeah.
told us again and again and again, right?
Mhm.
So it helps
Yeah.
me to know my frame. So I'm not some huge disappointment to you when I sit here and my mind drifts
Exactly.
and my mind drifts, right? This is not
Uh-huh.
shocking to God,
Right.
right? So there's a
Mhm.
load of grace there, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of my will that needs to come into play too.
Yeah.
So I don't make a big deal about it. I don't think I'm a failure. I might as well just stop. Like, no, I think, okay, Lord, can you help me? I love
Right.
in John 14, it says, the Holy Spirit will teach you all things and remind you of all the things I taught to you.
Oh,
So it helps
amen.
me know, okay, the Holy Spirit is a rememberer, right? He's someone who's going to
Right.
help me remember. So I can ask
Mhm.
him, can you help me? I am so distracted right now. I'm just going to acknowledge it for what it is. My mind is going a million places because there's laundry that needs to be done. There's dishes that need to be done. Those kids are going to wake up any minute, right? There's like all this tension. This is
Right.
real. I'm not making it
Mhm.
up, but could you help me right now? I just want to focus on you. And sometimes it's
Absolutely.
just like lowering our expectations. So maybe I don't need
Mm.
to read 3 chapters or three books this morning. Maybe it's one verse. Maybe it's one verse I need right now. This is what I have time for and capacity for, but I'm going to speak that verse back to the Lord, and maybe that's what I'm going to think about throughout the day. So that kind of
Yeah.
helps too. I might have capacity for this right now. And I'm going to
Right.
ask him to help me focus.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of leads into, what are some practical things as a homeschool parent that we can do? Because I mean, our title is that harmonious spiritual rhythms and homeschooling, and it just seems so out of sync so much, and we can
Mhm,
lay the best laid plans, and all these things,
mhm,
and yet very few days really feel like they were good days. And I just want to put that out there because I think a lot of times all we see is pictures of people's good days, like on
Yes.
Instagram and all of that. And the majority of it is not. I
Mhm.
mean,
That's
you're a sinner, your kids are sinners, your house is
yeah,
chaos.
yeah.
And yet in the middle of it, we are called to raise up the next generation
Mhm.
and do it in a way that's honoring God too.
Mhm.
So, how do we bring that kind of all together in a way that, we can practically have some tools to do that?
Mhm. Yeah. So the first thing I would do is I would sit down and write out how you define a good day. What's a good
Ah,
day, right?
yeah.
Because I
Mhm.
see that same thing on Instagram. You see someone reading their Bible in the morning with the candle lit and the tea's all steamy and their house is all clean. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the standard of what I need, right? In order
Right.
to meet with the
Mhm.
Lord. And what if it's not that sometimes? What if, what if everything's a mess and I'm getting half a sentence in and
Yeah.
what does that look like? So what is a good day? What is a good day? Is it taking what's placed in front of me, however big or little that might be, and just offering that back to him? So we can put
Right.
like some hard stops into our day. So I found during the bulk of homeschooling when it was really intense. I have teenagers now who are more independent, so it's not quite as intense as it used to be.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
man, meeting with the Lord in the morning, that was always the goal. But if kids wake up
Right?
early or kids are sick and I've been up half the night, so then sometimes you sleep
Exactly.
in. So that's not like, God knows what you need. He knows, and maybe rest
Mhm.
was it right now. Maybe rest was worship in some unique way, right?
I love
And then
that. Yes.
I tried to put in after lunch, like when I would just sit down and read. I love to read the Psalms. Those
Mm.
psalmists are like so good at getting at the heart of matters. So that would be
Right.
my afternoon hard stop. When I could, I would just sit down and read one psalm before I'd read anything else, because I would try to have everyone have a quiet reading time. When that could happen, there was a season where that was easier than others. But that's what I
Yes.
would do. I just read a psalm to reset my heart. Okay. But those
Mm.
aren't like what I need. I remember one day when my kids were really young and I had lots of kids not sleeping through the night. And I can be a real list checker, right? I can, like, these are the
Oh,
things I
yeah.
need to get done. So Bible
Mhm.
time's another thing I check. And I remember
Yeah.
going on through the day and I had a baby that didn't sleep through the night. And you get up and you just get going. It's just it's 80 miles an hour before you even get a chance to drink your coffee, right? And I
Right.
remember getting through that day and asking the Lord early on, you're going to have to help me because here we go, right? And then you just
Right.
go. And I remember getting to the end of the day and being so grateful for his nearness. And like
Mm.
you walked with me through that whole day. Like I did it without getting anxious and overwhelmed. And then I thought about, I never read my Bible that day. I never checked my mark. And I think that
Huh.
was so important for me to read, like, he's with me even when I
Right.
don't check the mark, right? So that it's
Mhm.
not about that. And that's what he was showing me in that moment. It's not about you, checking something off a list. Katie, know that I am with you. So is that the goal, to be in the word? Absolutely. But it's not
Yes.
what makes a day good or bad.
Exactly. Yeah, and God had to reorient that with me too with church activities. It's not
Mhm,
like what you look good like to everybody else in your community.
mhm,
It's, are you being obedient to me in this space? And in that, I mean, that's life changing because we put so much demands on ourselves that we should
mhm,
not. And that list tends to be like this blaring announcement to us that you're not doing it right, and you should really
mhm,
refocus and really get these things done because that's what's
mhm,
important. Instead of God's presence is with you, and are you paying attention to Him and what He wants you to do right in the moment? So yeah, those are some great things. I love that hard stop. And yet the grace to give yourself and the grace that God
mhm,
gives you in that,
mhm.
that
Absolutely.
it's not an end all be all that, this has to happen then. So just doesn't happen.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
yeah. So you talked a little bit about distracted. You know, we
mhm,
we live in a very distracted world. What is the cost of being distracted?
mhm, mhm. It's a great question to be asking, right? Like what do we lose
Right.
in not focusing on one thing? And the the feeling of being distracted seems to be pretty rampant. Like
Yeah.
everyone knows it,
Oh,
everyone
absolutely.
feels it. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, what is the cost of that? So oftentimes we think of social media We think of these
Mhm.
algorithms, the Netflix algorithms, all these things that are set up to take our eyeballs away from what we want. They just want to keep our eyeballs
Yep.
on a certain screen, right? They are
Yeah.
after our attention. They call it the attention economy, right? It's set up
Mhm.
to
Oh,
grab
yeah.
our attention. But beyond that, the real cost of distraction is not distracted eyes or just the 15 minutes we spent here, but it's a distracted heart. It's how those
Mm.
things affect our
Yeah.
heart
Yeah.
and our thinking. Like we were just talking about with what you see with someone's quiet time online, right? Like all of
Mhm.
a sudden I don't just think that doesn't remind me, oh, I should make time to meet with the Lord too. But then all of this thinks in about, am I doing it like she is? And do I have enough? And then does that take my heart away from what I
Yeah.
really need to be focusing on anyways? Is that healthy?
Mhm.
So when
Right.
when the psalmist says, "Give me an undivided heart that I might fear your name," when I
Yeah.
have these factions of my heart going out in so
Mm.
many directions, is there anything left to give
Right.
before the Lord, right?
Yeah.
So that just going beyond the surface of what is it like when I'm living with my heart in all these places. I had a friend share some
Mm.
research with me recently, and she was saying that just in 30 minutes on social media, we can expend so much of our emotional empathy, we don't have it left to give to the people around us. Which I thought that's so
Wow.
interesting because we can be
Yeah.
so aware now of what's going on across the world. And it's a beautiful thing at the same time. It's a blessing that
Mhm.
we can help people around the world and we can be aware
Right.
of needs that we weren't before. But
Mhm.
sometimes we take so much of that in that we don't
Mm.
have any compassion left for the people right in front of us in our home. So being
Right.
aware of what is the cost of this, of all this information I'm taking in, is it a healthy thing in this time for me, or is it an unhealthy thing?
Mhm.
And weighing that is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really prioritizing
Mhm.
um and I never even, yeah, considered it. We only have so much in our bucket. And the bucket's
Mhm.
empty, it's
That's right.
empty. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, what is most important? Who is most important? And, it
Mhm.
just it kills me to see, parents on their phones when their kids are right next to them. And,
Mhm.
I try the best not to do that, and a lot of people get really upset with me. I don't answer texts for days, sorry.
Yes.
But my
Yes.
phone is usually not on me. And,
Mhm.
but yes, but it has to be a conscious effort almost now because you're drawn in so much to so many things and, little dings here and bells there, and to say no is so hard.
Mhm.
But it
Mhm.
is so important because we can lose out on so much.
That's right.
Just that, and you lose it, you can't get it back.
That's
Now
right.
that 2 of my 3 kids have moved out now,
Mhm. Mhm.
you realize that time is way shorter than you
Mhm.
thought it was gonna be.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so now your influence is way down in the
Mhm.
scale.
Mhm.
Thankfully, it's still
That's
there.
right.
Being a homeschool parent, you develop those relationships, and my kids want me in their lives, but not
Mhm.
in the same capacity as living in the same house anymore. But
Mhm. Mhm.
but yeah, yeah, it's a big wake up that,
Mhm.
we can miss so much.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
So
perspective after you have a kid leave is so important. And you just can't buy that, right? Like
no.
just so now I have a kid launching as well. And I think it really
Mhm.
just changes. And no one could have told me that before. So that's
Right.
just something you live through, but you realize how quick it goes and it changes how you be like, yeah, this is tiring. Yep, this
Mm.
is exhausting, but man, I just get a little time to do it. And I want all of
Eh
it. And so you just
yes.
Lord strengthen me to do it well.
Uh-huh. Yes, because on the ones
Yes.
that follow after that, it's like, "Oh, man, I gotta give you more."
Yes.
So they get a lot more attention, but yes,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, unfortunately, my oldest doesn't even like to travel, so we only see him twice a year, but that's
Oh
just the way
wow.
he is, but yeah.
Mhm.
You take it for
Mhm.
what you can.
Yep.
Um, so interruptions versus distraction. We
Mhm.
have a lot of interruptions in our days.
Mhm. Mhm.
Things come up, not as planned. Um, how do we mentally prepare ourselves to say, yes, I this is something that needs my attention and this is something that's not.
Yeah.
And then just to prioritize it, I had a discussion with my daughter before the broadcast today, and she's like, "Oh yeah, in our first class psychology for success in college, they were talking about how we need to make sure that we don't focus on the urgent and yet the important." And I
Mhm.
think that's just a struggle. But
Mhm.
yet that interruption versus distraction, and how do we qualify each of those and
Mhm.
then live with some things we are just our plans are just gonna be off. We're gonna be interrupted,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
our plans are gonna be off if we're distracted too.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in my own life, I notice that distractions are often things that I choose to lend my eyes to, right? So I could pick up my
Ah,
phone. I'm going to look up a recipe, right? Just with great
mhm.
intentions because the phone is a tool, right? And I can use it
Right,
in great ways. So I'm getting a dinner recipe, but then all of a sudden a notification pops up. And so then I'm here and then I'm there and then I'm on social checking on a friend and then I'm looking at someone from high school's paint color on their house, which I don't even care
right,
about their paint color.
right.
Here I am, just like 10 minutes later, right? Like how does this it's so bizarre how it happens and we're on some
Right.
rabbit trail. So, I could waste 10 minutes of my time doing that quite
Mhm.
easily. But then when someone interrupts me, it's them coming into what I'm doing. And then I'm annoyed, right? Because I have something I'm
Right.
doing right now and it's very
Uh,
important and I need you to not interrupt mom, right?
mhm.
But I just wasted 10 minutes over there when it was my choice to give way to distractions. That's when I noticed the disparity.
Right.
Like this seems like a little bit off here. I'm kind of missing
Yeah.
something here. And then when I turn to look at the life of Christ, like the interruptions are hard because as a
Yeah.
homeschooling mom, you got to be on it to get anything done. I have to be
Right.
somewhat orderly. And if people keep on interrupting me, I want to love them well, but then you have grandparents who want to stop by and someone else who stops by and someone else who needs help. Like I could literally get nothing done if I give way
Right.
to all these interruptions.
Mhm.
But when I looked at the life of Christ and I was thinking, did he ever get interrupted? What was going on here? He was interrupted
All
constantly,
the time,
constantly
yeah.
interrupted all the time. Someone coming on scene, or he goes across the lake and someone's running to the other shore. I just think that is so exhausting. And he
Yeah.
continually, over and over again, met those people with compassion, right?
Absolutely.
He's
Mhm.
going one way, and here they are. He's going to help Jairus's daughter, and the woman with the issue of blood meets him on the way.
Yeah.
He met those
Mhm.
people with compassion, and he saw this as this is the eternal work. This is the
Yeah.
work that the Lord put in right in front of me. And in the same way, he was never distracted. So he was often interrupted, never distracted, because when he was done, he went about his mission. And this is what I'm
Yeah.
going to do. And he went back on his way. So I just
Mm.
try to adopt as much as I can. Okay, this is what it is.
Right.
Yesterday my parents, they were having an issue with their plumbing at their house and they needed to come over. Well, we're going to be homeschooling, but I guess we're not today. This is what we're going to do.
Right.
This is who
Mhm.
God gave me to love. And it's taken some years. When my kids were younger, I just thought if I have to control the structure to control the outcome, right? And at the
Yeah.
same time,
Yeah.
you love it in theory that people would stop by your home, and then practicality, they can feel the tension when you're like looking at your clock. And, oh my goodness, I need you to get out of here so we can get something
Right.
done. But
Exactly.
what if this is the work that God gave me to do today, right? What if this
Yeah.
is the work God gave me to do? So there's
Mhm.
balance in that because I can't have people coming over every day that we really never get
Right.
any schoolwork done. But it's not like that. That's usually not what's causing my frustration. It's these things that throw when I had a different plan. So it's
Mhm.
really come to Lord, help me see at the beginning of the day. If I could just ask him, help me see the work you have for me today. I have this plan.
Yes.
It's okay to have a plan, but it's also okay to toss it out and say, this is what God gave me to do today. And this is what we're going to
Mhm.
do. And I want to not only serve those people well, but I'm teaching my kids how to do it while I do it,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's those the interruptions. I love what you said about that though. It's my choice.
Mhm.
There's so many
Mhm.
things that we do choose and we get so set. And I remember being in that too. I had major anger issues when my kids were young, and I wrote about that in a book. But just that was one of the things that God showed me too, was that this is a teaching moment. It's
Mhm.
not you have to fix it right away and be frustrated with it. And when you can make that shift about what is really happening in this moment,
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
and step back enough that you can evaluate it like sensibly.
Mhm.
Because a lot of
Mhm.
times we don't evaluate things sensibly, and that's when it ends up being a problem. But,
Mhm.
to build in just that ability to say, "Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
And why am I responding this way? And,
Mhm.
what is the root of that?" And God is so good, and like you said, Jesus is the perfect example of that.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember being a young mom and reading about, all the distractions. I have notes in my Bible on the side of that,
Mhm.
just to saying, "Oh, if I could only have such compassion when I'm
Mhm.
interrupted."
That's right. That's right. Mhm.
But God fills in our weaknesses,
He does.
thankfully.
He does. Yeah. And when we just ask him for that, ask him, like, I think sometimes homeschoolers live lives that are even more interrupted than most because people know that you're home, right? Like oh, you're
Yeah,
home, you're fine, you
exactly.
could help with this or whatever. So
Mhm.
it's a great privilege and opportunity. But it's something that we need to keep asking him, show me throughout the day, like train my reflexes. Because what you're saying there is when
Yeah.
you are able to pull back and assess the situation, which is often what it is the answer to most of our responses, right? Even
Yeah.
when we're deciding if this is a good day or a bad day, like, Lord, help me pull back and look at this like you do. Help me look at
Right.
these people like you do, right? So we're not
Mhm.
really capable of that on our own. Our flesh is loud and our
Yeah.
reflexes of our flesh are quick, right? I have something to say
Yes.
about that. And I could just say
Yeah.
it really quick, but help me, like guide my heart and my tongue in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really good. It's a training. And
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think we can not give ourselves enough grace, realizing that we're in as much training as our kids. And I love that about your
mhm,
bio. What I read at the very beginning is you're
mhm,
growing with your kids.
mhm,
We don't often see this as a training ground for us, and
mhm,
yet a lot of people don't start homeschooling. And I know this is a season, Christmas season, people often evaluate, is school working? Is this something I
mhm,
want to do? Um,
mhm,
and they look at seasoned homeschoolers and say, I can't be that person.
mhm,
But they don't realize that we've been trained. We have
mhm,
grown with our kids.
mhm,
What advice would you have for a parent who's maybe sitting on the fence and saying, I I feel this nudge from God, but I just really don't think that this is something he can do through me.
mhm. It's a hard place to be because I so remember being a young homeschooler and seeing those more seasoned homeschoolers too, and just the grace they had. And sometimes I don't know. I mean, there's a gradual process of going there, right? Like
Yeah.
no one got there overnight. It wasn't just, I mean, by the power of the Holy Spirit you could. But
Right.
there's years of training, years of growing with God, years of gaining that wisdom. So it's not an either or,
Mhm.
like I'm either gonna be like this or I'm gonna be like them, one or the other. Like
Right. Yeah.
there's a million degrees in between, and those little tiny bits of growth at one time you were patient with the interruption, all of that helps, right? All of it
Yeah.
counts, our little tiny baby steps of growth. And I think if we look at how that would happen in our children, right? So
Mhm.
you're teaching your kids math.
Good.
They're going to
Yeah.
learn that so incrementally. And we don't expect them to do math like a senior when they're in second grade, right?
Right.
And so we don't every day between second grade and 12th grade say, you're smarter now, you're smart, but they are. Like all those
Yeah.
lessons are adding up and they're growing. And we don't have as much grace with ourselves. We want to be a
Yeah.
senior when we're in second grade. So, like, those small
So
bits
true.
of growth, they all count. Yeah. The other day, I
Mhm.
was reading an article by the Harvard Business Review, and they had done some studies on wisdom. And and this is like totally secular, but
Yeah.
common grace issues. They were talking about the way we accrue wisdom. They actually believe it's living through circumstances, and then when we're able to remember those circumstances, we can discern how people respond. And so, really, accrued wisdom is just
Yeah.
remembering circumstances and remembering responses. And I thought, why
Hmm.
wouldn't it be that way, right? We
Right.
kind of grow, but we can't do that overnight. We can't live enough
Right.
experiences. We can't have all of that at once. We can pray that
Mhm.
God grows us and He can give wisdom to those who ask, but we need to be patient with ourselves along the way.
Yeah, I think we live in such a society that's like if you go to school, if you study this, if you buy this master class, you're just going to be perfect. And
Hmm.
it doesnn happen. That wisdom is not
Hmm.
ingrained in us until we live
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
And you can spend thousands of dollars on
Hmm.
gaining wisdom, which you only gain knowledge, and you
Yes.
really don't know how to use it until
Yes.
you use it.
That's right. Yes.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's a great point of view to have because
Hmm.
yeah, it answers a lot of those questions.
Yeah. And it only increases our dependence on the Lord, right? Our need for
Yeah.
Him to teach us through
Mhm.
it. Like, and man, if we could instantly accrue all of that wisdom, we'd be so prideful. Like, come learn from me because I
Yes.
got this homeschool thing figured out. Like, what an opportunity for pride. Instead, we sit in a place of humility, saying, Lord, I need you again today. Okay, now it's a
Exactly.
new
Yeah.
challenge in science, and I need you again today. Now it's a new kid and a new personality, and man, they're in a funk, and I don't want that to
Mhm.
bring me into a funk. Can you help me today? So it's just living in a place of
Yes.
need and knowing place of need is not a place of loss, right? It's a place of
Mhm.
winning because I'm doing this with Christ.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I
Mhm.
often sometimes people say I'm considered the expert on special education homeschooling, and I said, I really have no expertise at all. Everybody I interview, I learn more from, and I realize how
Mhm.
much I did it badly. and their wisdom is just being added to this collective. And I'm learning from so many people because I've been doing this podcast now for almost 5 years. I've sat at the feet of so many people with wisdom. And so, yes, I probably have more accrued knowledge just by being able to go, oh, I should have done it that way. And, asking questions and just learning from others and then practicing it after I've kind of taken away the bits and pieces from those conversations. And I think we forget that we have to go through that, and that God works in and through all of those circumstances, and community is so important in helping that. And we had talked about that already a bit. How do you find it within your own family that that you help each other to remember what's most important now that your kids are getting older?
Yeah, to a certain degree, everyone has to learn that on their own, right? It's this,
Yeah.
they're all growing in their own relationship with the Lord, as I continually am, right? But we can
Mm-hmm.
set rhythms and practices. So the other day, I was talking with a gal on an interview. We were talking about things we do to remember. Like, what are some hard things you can put, like real practices, tangible practices you could
Right.
put in place in your life when you're feeling fear, you're feeling like those lies that I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying how she worships. She's like, when
Yeah.
everything just starts to fall apart in my home, I can put on worship music and I can bust that through the speakers, and it just
Mm-hmm.
changes my heart. And I said,
Yeah.
the great thing about that is not only are you filling your home with worship, are you like
Mm-hmm.
trying to point everyone's heart to Christ, but you're
Yeah.
teaching your kids, like they can see when mom's tense, they can see when she's
Yeah.
frustrated and she's trying. So they're seeing you in the struggle, and they're learning how to deal with it as well, right? So that it's two part.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm worshiping God and I'm teaching my kids this is what I do when it all starts to crumble. And she
Yeah.
said her response was so beautiful, because she said, it's interesting because I guess that's what my mom did. I never really thought about it before, but
Oh,
that's what she did,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
So I
Uh-huh.
think as much as we can just live our life fully and honestly before our kids, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I just want to give them perfect. I want to give them the perfect mom. I want to
Yeah.
give them this house that's curated perfectly, the perfect Christmas, the perfect educational experience, where it does
Mm-hmm.
smell like chocolate chip cookies and there is classical music playing all the time. That's not
Yeah.
reality. 'Cause,
Right.
even if I could pull that off, I'm giving them something that's not going to be possible for them to pull off either, right? It's an unrealistic
Yes.
expectation.
That is
So, and that's not
true.
my goal
Yeah.
with these kids. I want to
Mm-hmm.
introduce them to what's real. So I can process these things verbally with them. I can say, man, moms, I am frustrated today. It is hard for me today. I'm struggling, but this is what I do. Let's talk about it. And I can walk them through my actual
Mm-hmm.
strategies. I don't know which ones they will adopt. I don't know which
Right.
ones will like really sink in and become their
Mm-hmm.
own habits, because that's going to be between them and the Lord. But I'm going to offer up
Yep.
as many as I can to them, and trust that they'll latch onto some, and that will be the way they become rememberers and fight those things in their own life as adults.
Yeah, that's really good because yeah, our kids are each different, and some things are going to
Mm-hmm.
work for them and some things are not, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not because we figured it out that they're going to, now
Right.
just it's all going to be. And roses down, it's like, oftentimes I ask God, I'm like, why did you give me this wisdom after? It's like,
Yeah.
I should have had it before, but
That's
you
right.
knew that they needed to kind of have a messed up life, I
Yeah.
guess, and in order to make your plan work out for them. And I just had to
Yeah.
come to that peace that,
Mhm.
yes, it just wasn't going to be perfect and it's not going to be perfect. And that's why we need God. And that's why my
That's
kids
right.
need God. And that's, if we were to do it all perfect, we wouldn't need him.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah.
And we'd also wait till we're 80 to have children, right? Because would we
Yes,
ever be smart
exactly.
enough?
Yes. So as we're approaching the holidays, and you mentioned that a little bit, I would
Mhm.
love for you to talk just about, those harmonious rhythms through
Mhm.
holiday seasons. I think it's when we most become out of sync. And yet
Mhm.
this is the birth of our king, and it should be
Mhm.
the least amount of time or time of the year where we should be out of sync. But
Mhm.
but what are some ways that we as families, especially with homeschooling, that we can maybe be more purposeful this season
Mhm.
about being um, intentional?
Mhm. I would start with setting it up correctly in my mind. Like, what do I really want my kids to remember this year? What is the
Right.
one thing I want to take away? Had this sweet moment recently. I have a friend whose son, he's 29, so they're a little bit older, and he just met someone who he wants to marry, and she's also 29, and they're just on this fast track, right? Because they have wanted to be married but haven't found the right person, so they kind of know what they want, and it's just different than maybe it would
Yeah.
be for a 20-year-old, right? So
Right.
anyway, so the kids spent some, they're barely kids, I guess they're adults,
Yeah.
spent some time together getting to know each other. And she was saying, her son, as he got to know her friends and her parents and just spent this intensive time like talking with them, he noticed everyone said just how kind she was. And, they've obviously been talking and having
Mm.
lots of phone conversations and getting to know each other really well. And he had noticed that, but to have that be the recurring theme from every person,
Right.
she's just so kind. That stuck
Mm.
with me. Like, what would someone say about you in that situation? Would
Right.
they say she's just so, what a great thing to have your friends and family and all these people you interact with say about someone, just the presiding theme that she's so kind. So in the
Mm.
same way, that had me thinking about, what do I want the theme of my holidays to be? What do I want it to be in my home? Do I
Yeah.
want it to be like, what is the one thing, if my kids only took one thing away from this, is it that, the tree was beautiful? That's
Mm.
what I want them to know, right? The presents were so good. Or do I want them to know Christ with their mom, who gets some things right and gets some things wrong? And someday we did the Advent calendar or the Advent reading, and other days we missed it because we were doing other things as a family. Like, can that still be good? So maybe to a
Right.
certain extent, it's just lowering my expectations. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean you have to be a minimalist and we can't
Right.
do the things and we can't try the things. And if you love decorating, I love decorating for Christmas in my home. Let's do it.
Hmm.
But some years it's more than others.
Right.
Some years the devotions we do are more than others. There's times I've set out with these great plans of we're gonna do this Christmas school. It's gonna be so great. And then I end up feeling defeated and ruined when it's like we did half of them. We didn't even frost the cookies we made, or
Yeah.
whatever else. You know, and that can be its own funny memory yeah, remember that year
Exactly.
that we didn't frost the cookies and we ate them, and hey, we missed out on the frosting, they were better for us or something.
Right.
All of
Yeah.
that can be good. I want all
Hmm.
of these memories, Lord, to glorify you. I want them to like bond our
Right.
family together, connect our family
Hmm.
through celebrating your birth. And not every celebration is going to go perfectly, but can it
Mm.
still be good? So I think just asking your
Right.
question that at the beginning with your husband, maybe with your whole family if the kids are older,
Yeah.
what is
Hmm.
it that we want this to be about? What is it that we want to remember? And how can we make some things,
Exactly.
how can we set some things up to make that happen? And then
Hmm.
just commit to being joyful and offering it all. Let's offer him our mess. Let's offer him our unfrosted cookies if that's what it comes to. And then you're
Yes.
teaching
Yeah.
them a life skill at the very same time.
Yeah, exactly. That just, yeah,
Mhm.
things aren't just going to go perfectly every year. It's not this cookie cutter. It didn't mean that. But yeah, so my kids, came to this expectation that every Christmas we do this, and then
Mhm.
things just changed,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
started moving out of my house, and Christmas it just isn't the same. You don't get all the snacks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Life has
Mhm.
gotten busy. And
Yes.
so, I often do ask my kids that now, what are your top 3 things when
Mhm.
we all get together that you wanna
Mhm.
do that we do together? Because
Mhm.
it's you just can't do it all,
Mhm.
and you've gotta focus on, again, what's most important,
Mhm.
and, um, and making certain that God is, he is in the mix of your decision making as well, and
Mhm.
what is
Mhm.
most important to him,
Mhm.
and
That's right.
and so, yeah, bringing that all together. So as I'm gonna have you talk about your book after this, but before we do that, I'd love for you to just what would you like to challenge our listeners with?
Mhm. I've been asked this question before, and I think different things every time, but so much of our conversation has become about just stepping back from the
Mm,
moment and having this conversation, this background conversation continually with the Lord. It's like, what would you want me to see here? What do
yeah.
you want me to remember here? I think that's such a great challenge. I still feel the need for
Mm,
that in my own life. I'm not writing about this or talking about it because I've mastered it. I've talked about it because I need it, right?
right.
There's so many different angles as our kids grow, and so many different relationships. I feel like the
Mm,
relationships change over and over again. And now I'm learning to
absolutely.
parent adult children, and I've never done that before. So I'm new again at this. I just thought I just mastered teenagers or whatever, we're going through all of these things. And so my need for the Lord to teach me, to guide me and all those conversations. And it's so easy to make it about the thing, make it about the conversation with dating, make it about the marriage thing, make it about the Christmas thing, but not stepping back and have that conversation with the Lord saying, like, what do you want me to learn here? How can I honor you here in this relationship with this holiday? As I teach this kid, how can I honor you? What does that look like? I mean, talk about the drummer boy. I have no gift to bring. I have nothing without you. So I just want to honor you. I want to glorify you. I want to worship you with my work. Can you help me do that? Because sometimes I don't know. That's kind of an abstract idea, right?
Yeah,
but let me know. Teach me how to do that one step at a time. So I would just challenge them to step back when you feel those strong emotions, that strong exhaustion or that frustration with all the things. Like, how can I step back and say, what needs to go, Lord? What's too much? And how can I honor you here?
Yeah, to really lean in and listen instead of just reacting and doing. And that is so hard, but a practice that I'm sure you can testify to becomes a little bit easier as you're more purposeful about saying, no, stop. I need to stop. God needs to speak before I take another step. Yeah, because we can get way ahead of him and then be in the wrong place.
That's right.
And you don't want to be in those places because it takes a lot of energy and effort to get out of them then.
Right.
So tell us a bit about your book, But Then She Remembered.
Yeah. So that book came out in April, and anything I write is really, I'm ultimately a student of the Word. So it just comes from my time spent studying God's Word. And so I noticed many years ago as I was reading through just the call to remembrance throughout Scripture and what happens when God's people forget. And it's not a new thing. We see the Israelites losing their way. We see all kinds of times in the Scripture where people have lost their way, but God affords for that, right? There's grace for that. And he's reminding his people again and again. In Philippians 3, Paul starts out talking about, it is good for you, or it's no trouble for me, and it is safe for you, for me to remind you of these things. Like, it's good. It's for our minds. It's safe for us to be reminded again and again of God's goodness, of who he is, and of how he loves. And those have just been such powerful tools in my own life as I've gone through some hard things. And those times, those moments where I don't know what to do, I don't know how to respond, and like the anxiety and the fear is real. And I don't think that's just my specific situations. It's when we hear things on the world stage, when we worry about the future of our kids, when we talk about AI or politics, all of those things. Like, I don't know all the answers to all these things. So that anxiety is real in those moments. But what is also real is we can step back and say, but I do know who God is. And I do know how he loves. And I know how he's been faithful throughout my own life. So that's really just stopping to pull back and remember, but this I know of God, right? And it makes all the difference. So I don't have to know what the impact of foreign relations is going to be next week. I don't have to sit there and scroll everything about COVID because I just really want to know. We have this hunger to know, and we have access to information like ever before. But sometimes I think at a certain point, it just breeds more fear and anxiety. So how can I stop and think, God, who are you here? Who have you always been? So can I say, and even so, even if any of that, this is who God's going to be, and this is where I'm going to plant my feet. So that's really the heart of the book.
Yeah, that's beautiful because God meets us in those places, and he reminds us, just like you said, that's the work of the Holy Spirit to remind us. At the beginning of our conversation, that was very impactful when you said that. Because we're limited in capacity. We forget so easily. And like you said, the Bible's just a testament to that and how easily our human nature is about forgetting. But God is good to remind us if we put our attention on him and instead of on all the other things that are distracting us. And I think that's really a good summary of just this whole conversation. And it's been beautiful. I just thank you for all that you have shared today. So your website, katiewestenberg.com, what can people find there when they visit that site?
Yeah, you can find information about my books and where they can be found and all of that. And some blog articles. I'm not writing on there quite as much, but all the information on where you can contact me is on there.
Okay, awesome. And I will also put a link to, I guess your publicist also gave me a link to your book. So I'll share both of those links in the show notes, both on YouTube as well as the podcast. So you don't have to try to type that in or figure out how it's spelled. Just click on those links and you'll get to that information. So yeah, well, thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate just your sharing from your heart and your experiences. And I'm just so glad that God has given you this message. It's very pertinent in this time, and for
Thank
sharing
you
it
for
with
having me,
us.
Peggy. Yeah, thank you. I love being
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah. So next week we are going to talk. Stephanie Buckwalter is going to be back. She has been on our show many times, but she's going to talk about extended learning, how to homeschool after high school for a student who especially has more profound learning needs. Because a lot of times we wonder, what's that next step? And the traditional education system doesn't offer really a lot of good steps for kids who have been homeschooled and are used to that home environment. So she's going to talk about some alternatives that you have to do from home after high school, so you can keep your student learning and growing and have those opportunities open to them when they're ready. So excited about that conversation. And just make sure you check out Katie's website at katiewestenberg.com and check out the resources that she has to share with you. So thanks again, Katie. Appreciate you and taking time out of your schedule. And I just pray that God just continues to bless you and to speak through you the truth and love and encouragement.
Thank you, Peggy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll see you all here next week. Same time, same place. And until then, have a happy Thanksgiving. If you're watching the show live, I guess if you're listening to the podcast, that's beyond you. But we'll see you all again next week. God bless everybody.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool. Go to spedhomeschool.com to get resources and support for teaching your unique learner at home.